Hurry up, we don't have the whole day left, her voice tore him out of his whirl of thoughts. Dew found himself in a field of blue star-shaped flowers. The early spring sun was shining and warmed the back of his head, which was a welcome contrast to his otherwise goosebump-covered body. On the wide path that cut through the vegetation stood a woman who had her face partially turned towards him. Whether her skin was tanned by the sun or had always been the soft shade of brown, Dew didn't know and didn't care for, even though he had stayed pale even after being touched by the sun. What made her stand out was the additional pair of arms located underneath the ones that were considered normal. She seemed annoyed. "Stop daydreaming and pick up the pace." And without waiting another second, she clenched her 4 fists and continued walking forwards. There, at the end of the pathway, stood a round building with large windows. Its grey stone walls, dome, and overall architecturally simple design reminded him of the castle which stood between 50 to 100 meters behind him. Of course it did. They were both part of the residency belonging to the king of this land and his close advisors. The major difference was the inside. At least Tiana, who had now reached the building already, had said so. Finally he freed himself out of his numbness and followed her. The heavy iron doors were decorated with several symbols, the most prominent being the starflower. Tiana pushed them open and sighed with awe. The inside was blinding at first. Dew had never seen so much marble and gold in one place before. It was bigger than he had imagined from the simple outside. The ceiling was as comparably high up as the throne room would be, and was decorated with the pastel paintings of the sky and clouds shaped like various animals such as horses, sheep, and he could even make out the dragon near the center. Right before him stood 3 rows and marble pews, padded with thin dark blue pillows and with equally as much detail as the doors. Tiana had her hands trace the petals of the flowers while explaining to him in an almost singing manner, "Lord Rufus the First commissioned the most skilled artist of the kingdom to make these masterpieces when he was still alive. They say each of those took more than a year to make, not considering the time spent to acquire such materials. Can you even imagine how long it must have taken them to create this?" She hastily approached the center of the room. There, on a pedestal as tall as himself, stood a magnificent statue. It was a woman who, in her left hand, was holding a crown towards the sky and a claymore pointed downwards in the other. Her long braided locks of hair were whirling around her, and so was her cape, which looked as if it belonged to a high military general. Around her stood 4 smaller statues, one of a horse, one of a swan, one of a dragon, and one of a bird which looked as if it had been born from flames. Thanks to Tiana, he knew that the woman represented the goddess Bota, the protector and founder of the kingdom. Therefore, they shared a name. The 4 animals were supposed to represent other forms she had been seen in whenever she showed herself. At least so the myth had claimed. Her first royal cathedral had been destroyed by rebels during the last years in which the last king, Rufus I, had ruled the land. Their motive was unclear, but citizens rumored they were against a rule in which every person with hybrid features, like Tiana with her 4 arms, were treated differently. But calling the sacred building a cathedral was mostly for the royal's image. The original size, which was claimed to have been a quarter of the size of the castle itself, couldn't be reconstructed because the space and funds lacked. All standing in the royal gardens with the ever-blooming borage was an expensive chapel. The woman had already seated herself in the front row, bowed her head down and pointed one set of palms upwards as Dew finished observing the new building. Tiana had spoken of coming here as soon as she could once the building had been finished and simple servants like Dew and her were allowed to visit. Now she was muttering pleas for Bota, mostly towards the health of her mother and wishes for her love life as well. Loudly Tiana spoke of meeting a young man, any young man, who would change her life forever. Immediately, Dew wished he hadn't agreed to accompany her. She finished her prayers and turned around to him. "What about you? Do you not want to take the opportunity to wish for something?" "No need," he hastily replied. Tiana frowned. "Come on, there are 1,000 things you could need. You're in your best years, after all." The last comment made him cringe. First of all, he didn't believe in that goddess, and if she really existed, he assumed she wouldn't care about a simple person like him. That was because the last gift a royal received was claimed to have happened over 100 years ago. Second of all, He knew what she was implying, and hearing that from a person twice as old as him made him feel as uncomfortable as cleaning out rotten fish from a box within the storage room. Tiana shrugged while uttering something along the lines of "your loss" before leaving the cathedral. It was almost evening as he stepped outside and followed her back to the castle. The garden was located behind the main part of the building, which was made of 5 stories with a giant dome in its middle and 2 small watchtowers on either side. Even though he couldn't see it from this angle, you knew that the lower building was stretching forward to then reconnect and thereby create the square patio in its middle. He brushed the light blonde hair out of his view to look at one of the watchtowers. It stood in the mesmerizing light of the round body in the sky, while everything he could spot behind it vanished in sharp shadows. Then he realized it. "Tiana, can you go without me? I forgot something in my room," he exclaimed. It followed an annoying groan. "Are you serious? Fred and the others are probably waiting for us. We have a job to do, remember?" "I'll be fast. I'm quick at climbing stairs," he tried to soothe her, hoping it would work for once. Fine." She stood still and then continued while staring him deadly in the eye. "But if for any reason you don't show up in 10 minutes, I'll go up there and bust your door down. If you had decided to live with me, you could be ready by now, but no, you prefer to live with that creepy bastard instead." He wanted to roll his eyes. Yes, she had offered him a place in her bedroom which was comparably far away from his own, and yes, he also declined her offer. Since then she repeatedly tried to convince him otherwise, and it began to shift from annoying to mildly threatening. Her attitude was one of the reasons he refused to accept. The other one was that he'd rather live with a quiet, socially awkward knight with a bad reputation than a self-proclaimed princess who regularly invaded his comfort zone. As promised, he rushed upstairs to end up in the 5th story and quickly chose the corridor in which mostly lowly servants had their one-room apartments. The key clicked in the rusty lock of the wooden door before it swung open. Usually there would be some light falling through the window above the desk right across the room around this time of the day, but the tall silhouette facing towards the outside was blocking most of it. "Good evening, your highness," Dew was greeted theatrically. He walked beside the person and softly shoved him. "Stop that, you'll get me killed," Dew mumbled with obvious over-exaggeration and received a chuckle in response. "Whatever it is to please you, fishy." The person turned towards him and smirked while one of the streaks of black hair freed itself from a loose bun on the nape. This, even though hard for him to believe, was Dew's roommate. Standing next to him, Dew guessed he was maybe half a head taller than the blonde one and had colored skin like most people of this region, reminding him of the caramel he only got to see and smell instead of eating. What made him stand out a lot were his hybrid features, which, in comparison to Tiana's 4 arms, could be called exotic. Not only had he eyes that were an unsettlingly pink color when the light fell just right, he also had 2 large bat-like wings, the color of obsidian, growing from his back, and a set of black horns reaching from his forehead to far behind the back of his head. Of course, people looked at him with either amazement or fear, Dew being one of them, even though he had basically observed the development of those features. "Do you have to patrol tonight, Avery?" Dew asked while unconsciously gazing up the blue gambeson and the belt around his waist with a claymore attached to it. "Yep, 'tis time, Mr. Roof. What about you? No work today?" "I told Tiana I'd be there in 10 minutes. She'll kill me." Avery gestured a slight bow. "I want to see her try. Anyway, see you at some point." He patted Dew's shoulder before leaving the room. Dew's gaze followed his step before he turned around the corner and was out of his view. He couldn't help but smile through the embarrassment by the ridiculous gestures his roommate made towards him from time to time. If it wasn't for his position as a knight, he might have gotten punished for more than one of them, because the rules claimed the only respect belonged to the royal family. Yet Avery didn't care much and enjoyed teasing his friend. It had always been that way, even before their arrival at the castle almost 4 years ago. In a chest next to the desk he found what he was looking for, a bandana for his hair, which sometimes had a mind of its own, next to several pieces of clothing, most of them belonging to him. As he marched back to the door, he looked down on himself because a flicker distracted him. It was caused by the pink crystal he wore in a necklace despite not being a jewelry person. For a short moment he considered whether to take it off or not. In the end, he stuffed it in the collar of his light green shirt and almost ran downwards towards the kitchen.